So welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. Hopefully you're happy about the rain for the gardens. It's been a while. Welcome back, David. So I'm going to call the June 6th meeting of the Planning Commission to order. The first thing we'll do is just go over the agenda and see if we need to make any adjustments. Am I good, Erin, on the sound?
Yep, I can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Okay. So tonight we will have some administrative, we'll approve our minutes, public comment. Then we will welcome David White, our consultant working with us on the town plan, to discuss tonight's work session, which is about community facilities and infrastructure. And we'll also talk about the outline of the town plan. Since the draft now, I'm sure you're in heavy duty draft mode, and we are scheduled to have a draft here submitted to the Planning Commission by July 13th. So this is our second to last work session. Then we will allow some additional time for public comment specific to the town plan discussion. Then the Planning Commission will consider making a recommendation to the select board regarding a housing resolution that deals with construction targets for housing in Jericho that we've been working on with the Affordable Housing Committee for several months. Then we will hear a report about Declaration of Inclusion, the planner's report, some updates from Planning Commission members, and then planning our upcoming meetings from there. So does anybody have any changes or adjustments needed for the agenda? We proceed as planned. Okay, I'll also say it's a very full agenda. We have a lot to get done. So we are going to be quick and efficient as possible. However, not shortchanging any of our discussions. So if we need more time, we'll figure that out. Okay. Good. The next topic is public comment. So welcome, members of the public that are joining us tonight. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments to share with the Planning Commission? If you're online, if you would use the Zoom feature to raise your hand, and if you're here in the room, you raise your hand and I'll recognize you. Does anybody have any comments for the Planning Commission? Welcome. If you wouldn't mind, come up to the table where there's a microphone. And tell us your name.
Yeah, it's Robert DeVos, I live over on Milo White Road. First, I'm not sure where to begin because I know the topic is infrastructure. So is it pretty much wide open on where we can go or?
Yes, I'll tell you a couple of things. For this open comment, we ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes, but you're welcome to share with us your thoughts. And then also after David's discussion, we'll have additional time for comments specific to infrastructure. So if there's other things that come up depending on what he presents, because we're going to be hearing it for the first time tonight too.
Okay, all right. I didn't really prep for this, so
That's okay.
Is the clock running? I don't want to. It's going.
I'll keep it for you.
Okay, just real brief. I live over on Milo White. Several years ago, our neighborhood, which consists roughly between Ayers Drive and Milo White Road, there's roughly 16 to 18 houses. I'm not sure the exact count, but the bottom line is the one well that serves our community, our neighborhood, quit or whatever. So we were without water for several weeks. And basically the town, understandably, I understand, but they did nothing, no reach out, no concern. And in fairness, they weren't obligated to or something. As we probably all know, there are several water entities in Jericho. Each function pretty much independently, serving different neighborhoods or whatever. So to try to make it really brief, my hope is that a small portion of the ARPA funds could be used, could be put into grants. And right now in our neighborhood, the state is putting the pressure on. There's yearly inspections, if you will. But now they're asking for a lot more. We have buried water tanks, we have equipment that's, been there for years and years, and it needs upgrading. And this comes out of the neighborhood, water bill, if you will, we're all billed once a year. So, and I know a lot of people in Jericho have wells on their own. How you would adjust grants, if you will, if you consider that to them, that gets complicated. I know many people that have independent wells have no real concern for those of us that share wells or are part of different water entities within Jericho. So my hope, very brief, is that grants could be developed, well supervised, scrutinized, if you will. But this money could be set aside for expenses, additional expenses that water entities such as ours, the Jericho, water co-op could have, or whatever. In other words, I'm just going to use an example off the top of my head. Say if you folks considered roughly $50,000 divided by each separate entity, which I'm not sure how many there are. I apologize, I don't know. I'm saying 7 private entities. And then that money goes forward for needs, what we need to upgrade our water systems. And keep in mind, it might gone beyond the 3, was that the?
That wasn't it, but yes.
Okay.
So I think we understand what
Okay.
your request
Yeah,
is.
it's just, we have, there's no infrastructure really in Jericho. We're all working separate, but together, if I could say that, cautiously, I don't want to have misunderstood or whatever, but if we could have money set aside for these projects, you're only going to ensure the quality of water for your neighbors. You're also going to ensure the value of our homes, because once these systems start to fail or we have problems and people in the neighborhood can only afford so much to spend, you're going to see your home values could be well affected. And that's gonna trickle across Jericho. So it's an investment for each neighborhood. It's well supervised, it's scrutinized, it's grants for specific projects that need to be done. So I hope you would consider that.
Okay, thank you. Are you able to stay for discussion this evening or not?
I can stay for a few, but unfortunately, but thank you for your time, right?
Let's wait and see if we have any other public comment. Do we have any other public comment, either in the room or online? If you're online, if you wouldn't mind using the raise hand feature.
And before we do that, can you state your last
Oh,
name? The minute taker didn't catch your last name.
I'm sorry, it's a DeVos. It's a DEVOST.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, shoot, Eric, go ahead, I'll give it another.
I think Bob raises a very interesting question about the town of Jericho and the fact that we are almost all on private or communal wells on that. And it dawned on me that in my community, we have a sinking fund to replace our septic tank when it goes bad, community septic. So perhaps what might be a good move would be, and this would be more on you than us, would be to propose that the town have a townwide sinking fund to replace wells when they go bad. Which might be part of your property taxes that would then affect anybody in town whose wells go bad, because they go bad about every 20 years. There's now a town fund that came through your taxes, which would cover that. Something that if you want to bring it up to the select board, that's the appropriate body for that.
Right, at town meeting, I did ask the select board if they could arrange a meeting with the different independent private water entities, and they agreed. Where that's going to go, I don't know, but the bottom line is I think it's an excellent idea, but the select board, the bottom line is they don't want to get into the water business. So if it starts here at the planning commission and then something is proposed, then they'll take a better look at it, in my view, but it's an excellent idea. I understand what you're saying. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other public comment? Just in general, we'll have other time for public comment specific to infrastructure. Okay, so I'm going to move on then, and thank you very much, ask for a motion to approve the minutes of May 16th. Motion to approve the minutes. Sarah, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Wendy, thank you. Any discussion or corrections or edits to the minutes? Okay, we approve the minutes. All those in favor of approving the minutes? Aye. Anybody opposed? Abstained? Okay. Thank you. Now moving on to the next kind of bulk of the meeting tonight, asking David to come forward and give you the floor to talk about community facilities and infrastructure as it relates to the draft of the town.
Great, thank you. Excuse me. I'm going to share my screen and jump right into this, because I appreciate there's a lot of ground to cover. So, again, thank you for having me, and this is one of a series of work sessions with the Planning Commission around a variety of key topics that are included in the town plan and the town plan update. We have one more to go on June 20th, where we'll talk about the local economy. But tonight, the focus is on community infrastructure, facilities, and services. So this is a bit of a grab bag of topics that I put under this particular umbrella. But they kind of break themselves out in a couple of different things. There are things that are kind of physical assets, the infrastructure under the streets, whether it's electricity or water or wastewater, as well as buildings like town hall and fire stations and libraries and things like that, physical assets. And then there are operations and programs. Those are the services that may be delivered by the town or by somebody else that serves the broader community. And these are really the things that provide a really important backbone to how a community functions on a day-to-day basis. I think this is something I feel quite strongly about, because sometimes some of these things take on a bit of a life of their own, and that we really have to remember that this infrastructure, both hard and soft infrastructure, is created, it's located, it's designed and operated in order to serve the community. Right? It's there to help make everything else happen, not the other way around. And this is particularly an issue when it comes to transportation. There's so much time and effort and money that goes into transportation planning that it takes on a life of its own. And communities find themselves designed around a transportation system, rather than the transportation system is there to serve the land use that you want to have in your community. So it should be organized and designed and operated in a way that serves that land use pattern. And this infrastructure, whether it's hard or whether it's soft, typically is a function of local government, quasi-governmental entities, things like, solid waste district or a water district, or some sort of a nonprofit organization that serves the community. And here's just a list of the various things that kind of fit into some of these buckets that I will touch on briefly in the presentation. So I'm going to talk about these in kind of three different buckets or types, but first I want to just, and I promise you I'm not going to read any of these slides, but a lot of this or these presentations are things that you can read and reflect on later. But to provide a little bit of context from a policy perspective about, what are the guardrails, if we will, that we use when we're developing plans. And in this case, these are the state planning goals that have specific language in them relative to all of these different types of facilities. And I've simply highlighted one of them, which at a highest level reinforces that point, that public investment should reinforce the general character and planned growth pattern of an area, not the other way around. The town plan, these are the kind of broad overall planning goals that, again, when we think about infrastructure, we need to keep in mind, looking at an update of the town plan. Of course, a lot of these things are going to remain the same. These high level objectives for a community haven't changed, and in my opinion, shouldn't really change over time, unless you have an area that you're really looking to change in a vastly different way. And there are related goals in the current town plan that speak to transportation and education and energy and public facilities that I've pulled out for your reference later. So tonight I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to talk about three different kind of broader groupings of public infrastructure. The first I label as mobility. It's a little bit of a non-denominational view of transportation, because transportation is about how we move. It's not about driving our cars. It's not about riding our bikes. It's not about walking. It's about all of those things. So it's about mobility. And of course, Jericho has quite a robust network of roads and trails and paths. There's commuter service along Route 15. There is new and ongoing sidewalk construction that's going on in Riverside and has gone on in other parts of the kind of village centers in town. And there's more work that's underway. So there's a lot of stuff about transportation. There's a lot of stuff in the town plan. There's a lot of planning that has been done. There's a transportation study, a bike ped master plan, a street network plan for Riverside, and a commercial district master plan, which speaks about new roads and new paths and trails in that part of the town. So these are all things that are important elements to harness together when we talk about a new town plan. Some of the challenges, and we've talked about these before, some of this information comes out of the posters that we did for the community forum, but most people drive alone to work, about 80%. That is actually down from 2016, I think was the last data point, but it's still a large majority of people. And most people commute outside of Jericho to work. That means a lot of people are spending a lot of time in their cars. And when they're spending a lot of time in their cars, they're contributing to congestion on the roads, wear and tear on the roads, and emission of greenhouse gas emissions, unless you happen to drive electric, and then you just do all the other things. Electric is great, electric vehicles are great, but they don't solve all the problems that single automobiles provide to our society. So that's a challenge. Part and parcel to that is residents need to travel outside of Jericho, most, in order to go to work, in order to get everyday goods and services. There's an increasingly, there is growth in the number of services and businesses and opportunities within Jericho. So folks don't have to travel so far, but it's still pretty small. And for most things, you have to drive, into Williston or into Essex, maybe into Richmond. When we're concerned about greenhouse gas emissions, 40% of greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation sector, cars and trucks and buses and everything that burns a fossil fuel in order to get us around. That's an issue. If we want to meet our statewide energy goals, we want to meet, greenhouse gas emission targets as a state, as a community, this is an area that we really need. We can't lose sight of. We spend a lot of time talking about generating solar power and generating wind power, but transportation is a big one that we can do some things about. The last point I highlight here, because it's an issue for some roads, not so much for others, but 63% of all the road miles in Jericho are dirt. Now, some roads like mine, Skunk Hollow, got paved a number of years ago because of traffic volumes. It's very expensive for the town to maintain a dirt road as traffic volumes increase. And there's increasing pressure then for the town to find alternatives. And that then creates typically a conflict in a neighborhood where there's a discussion about paving a dirt road. Again, it's not every road in town or dirt road in town where that becomes an issue, but it's those that provide important connections between places. And again, to use Skunk Hollow as an example, it's an important through connection, and it is only to become more so once it got paved, which was part of the concern. But that's kind of part of the transportation issues that we have to keep in mind. So when it comes to priorities for the future, I've highlighted a few things, and Susan, maybe, I don't know, at the end or at breaks in the middle of this presentation, do you want to have a conversation about these topics, or do you want to lump them all at the end?
I think we could take logical chunks.
Okay, so after this, we'll do that when it comes to mobility, but I've highlighted what I see as being some really important priorities. First is the creation and expansion of compact mixed-use development that can support people living closer to where they work and where they shop. That doesn't solve the objective for everybody, but it creates opportunities for people to walk and ride to their everyday goods and services, to get to work where those opportunities exist. It's a very important tool in helping us reduce the amount of traffic on our roads, and particularly the amount of energy we use in moving ourselves around. Prioritizing an interconnected network of sidewalks, paths, and paths. Sidewalks, paths, and trails for non-motorized mobility, especially in and around community centers. Now, it's nice for people to be able to walk and bike for their everyday goods and services, but it's also a very important element of how we kind of create and maintain a healthy community, giving people opportunities to be active as part of their daily routines. Again, rather than getting in a car and drive, you can walk and you can improve your physical and mental health as a result. There are, in some of the plans I mentioned previously, there are discussions of some new street and road connections. And I highlight a couple of examples here. The top is the commercial district master plan that shows a proposed extension of North Main Street, linking it back to Route 15 on the eastern end, as well as some possible trails. The image on the bottom is from the Riverside Street Network master plan. In both cases, these are places where there's a desire to create more interconnection of the street network, and for it to happen in a certain way. And these are things then that the town really should be taking a lead on, not waiting for somebody else to do for them. So highlight that in that these things are prioritized and advanced by the town in order to improve connectivity and diverse traffic flow. Road improvements, and that should really be any sort of improvements, streets and trails as well, but they need to be appropriate to the context. Whether it's a rural part of town or it's one of our village centers, the physical context of that place and what we intend it to be is really important, and that should define the scale and design of that infrastructure that goes into place. And using a tool like a design speed as a tool to help us prioritize safety. Often when the highway infrastructure is being designed, the focus is there's always an important focus on safety, but the speed of vehicle travel on those roads is not always paramount. And speed is probably the most important factor around safety and protecting life and limb. The faster vehicles are moving, when they impact with something else, the greater the trauma, and anything over 35 miles an hour is a significant impact. So what's the intended speed of vehicles to operate on these roads has got to be paramount. And that affects the design, that affects what it looks like and what it functions like, because we all know that when you're driving down the road and you have a nice wide road and a nice straight line, your speed just tends to go up. And you also tend to get a little bit more distracted about what's going on. But if you're driving through a neighborhood that has cars parked on one or both sides of the road, and the lanes are kind of narrow, and you have opposing traffic, and you have to kind of think about how you're going to get past one another, you're keenly aware of everything that's around you. Those cars on either side of you is called friction, and it's called friction for a reason, because it causes you to slow down, it causes you to focus, and those kind of design elements are really important in affecting our behavior when we drive on the road. The next thing is stormwater management, which is a big issue around the transportation system. When we build roads, we also build culverts and bridges and swales and things like that to manage the water in and around them. Those things need to be designed, they need to be repaired, they need to be replaced with a changing climate in mind. Understanding that increasing amounts in velocity of water as our climate changes is going to affect, is going to have a huge impact on that infrastructure. And those things need to be properly designed and sized in order to meet that future need. Not just the fact that, oh, the flood map says it's 100-year flood in this area. Well, you know, a lot of places have been having 100-year floods every 3 or 4 years now. So that doesn't help. We need to be thinking farther ahead, because it's a cost issue. Every time you have to go out and dig up the street and repair something that got washed out again, you know, it's an unnecessary cost if you had done it a little bit bigger and a little bit more thoughtful the first time. So that's got to be a priority. And the last plug I put in here is around both fixed route and on-demand transit service. Not likely to see a huge change in this, but it is a great opportunity. We have existing transit service along Route 15 where we can take advantage of it. As we see that be utilized more, and we do things to help facilitate it being utilized more, i.e. we grow more community around the Route 15 corridor and the 2 village centers that we have there, then we may see increases in the frequency of that service. And on-demand transit service is something that's discussed in the Tri-Village Transit Study, which is another important element about how do you provide some sort of, you know, alternative mobility, public transportation in rural areas. So those are important concepts to kind of keep in mind. So I'm going to stop on mobility right now, and we can talk about it.
What, comments, questions?
Yeah.
From the planning commission for right now?
David, what is the general maximum distance people will walk between point A and point B before they get in their car?
So it depends on a lot of factors. It depends on the purpose of their trip. You know, if they're going to buy groceries, it's going to be shorter than it is longer. You know, weather and factors like that. But typically, we think about, you know, a 15-minute walk, you know, 5, 10, 15-minute walk, 5, 10, 15-minute bike ride. Those are the distances. And when we think about the kind of planning around the villages, I've used you know, a half a mile and a full mile buffer around those areas as kind of that typical walking distance. That's your 5 or 10 minute walk.
And what percentage of Jericho population lives within that 5 to 10 minute walk of our
I dare say it's
current
a
town center?
it's a fair amount of the population itself, because those areas cover, all of the village centers, much of the village district itself. All of the larger neighborhoods that are kind of off of Route 15 and off of Raceway. So I don't have a number of actually how many households that is. Not sure I could come up with an accurate estimate in terms of actual households.
So this is very helpful. You started out by showing us some of the things that are in the current town plan. So can you highlight for me what on this list is the most different? That would be the biggest change from what our current strategies prioritize.
So I think these are all things that are reflected in the current town plan. And the thing where maybe I'm taking the biggest leap on here, and nobody threw anything at me when I said it, was the town taking the lead on building street connections. Places where the town needs to take a leading role in order to make something happen. There's a lot of good stuff in a lot of these plans. And as we've talked about, a lot of these plans are just going to sit on the shelf until somebody pushes to make something happen. And the most important things are the things that the town needs to lead on.
So as you draft, and depending on, whatever happens to all this content, I think it's important to call out that change, that strategic shift, so that we're gonna get blowback for it. Let's solicit the blowback. If we're gonna get support for it, let's get the support for it. I think in the planning commission, probably when you haven't been here, we have talked about that. I actually wrote that down.
Yeah, that's why I wasn't too scared.
So whether or not the town takes the lead on it, and also, but we've also talked about whether or not the town would take over roads either that already exist or ones that developers develop after some period of time and in certain locations. So is there sort of a hybrid where rather than maybe the town does the building, fine, or maybe the developer would do the building and then after 3 years, the town would take it over, provided that it met specs. I don't know, I think that's what or existing roads that are failing or that are not servicing the neighborhoods or that are not being well connected to other areas maybe, or like you're talking about dirt to paving, those are ones that the town could take over. So that is a strategic shift that we're going to decide to support or not. I think that needs to be explicit, whatever the implementation of it is. And then I would add in your first paragraph, I think getting people to and from school is really important. Probably more important. More people are going to schools in Jericho than going to jobs in Jericho. And then in terms of the transit, we heard, I don't know if you were here, but we heard about the number of people that it took to support a bus stop and how many people you needed to support a bus stop, that it would be, 20 years before Jericho Corners is going to really be big, even if we do all the building in the world that we want to do. So is there a role for consolidating demand through like park and ride?
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So also kind of explicitly discussing that. And then lastly on stormwater, I think we talked about this before with you, that there's this concept of one water that I think we learned about from a town in North Carolina that you might have told us about this, David, that this one town does their planning using like stormwater is often associated with building and transportation, but this town looked at one like they looked at one water, like drinking water, surface water, wetlands, storm water, like all the waters were integrated and considered as a cohesive planning element.
Mhm,
I know
mhm.
you are familiar with that concept. It's kind of a little bit off topic, but I just wanted to throw that out there too.
It certainly is a familiar topic. I'm not familiar with the plan you're talking about, but particularly in the plan here, when we're talking about the role of the natural environment in providing us with green infrastructure. So water is part of that green infrastructure, particularly in kind of thinking of it in all of those contexts. Whether it's, the babbling brook behind your house, or whether it's when it's, confined into a man-made channel someplace else, how water moves through and infiltrates in our community is got to be a holistic view.
Right, okay,
And that would treat wastewater from
right.
your effluent as well coming out of your septic.
Yeah, you guys remember that? I make that up. No, you remember that, okay. Other comments?
I would just emphasize what Susan said about the town's role. I think it can't be stated enough or strongly enough or boldly enough that the town needs to take an active leadership role in making this stuff happen. And I would like to see that translated into, when we get to that point, the specific goals.
Yeah, if I could just add one more thing. Just conceptually, I love that you identified climate change as something to plan ahead for. And given, Susan, what you were saying, sort of what's different here. Like just anchoring the town plan, not just in the past, but in the, what can we anticipate the changes are that are coming in the future?
Mhm.
Right, because the town plan should be very forward looking. And I know a lot of the background and resources are gonna be what's happening now, what's the status now? All sorts of things. But it just reminded me of something that as we think about what do we want this plan to be, Susan, you hit two of them. One is strategic, right? Another is being really clear about what the town role is, as opposed to just all the great things that we could do for land use planning. And then the third, I would say, is really forward thinking so that we're prepared for what might come. So in a sense, I know we're going to talk about values at some point, but in a sense, those are the three values that I would think that we would want to use in shaping how do we decide what is most important.
Mhm.
That's my plug.
Did you happen to put these in your opinion, in order of priority or?
Sort of.
Sorry?
Yeah.
I think for me at this point, it's gonna be helpful to see, hear the whole presentation and see what is the relationship among all the elements of the infrastructure.
Mhm. Well, I can tell you that the first one gets repeated at least
Yeah.
one more time in just this topic, let alone, nearly every other topic we have.
David, if it's all right with you, we do have, people with their hands up, but what I would prefer to do is just have a short kind of reaction from the planning commission per topic, but then make sure we plan enough time. Once you get all the way through, we see the big picture, that we make sure we have enough time for people. So for people who are in the room or on the Zoom, we will open it up for public comment, but just not not topic by topic,
Okay.
okay?
Great.
That would be a little too micro for me.
Okay. Anything else, or should I move on?
You move on.
All right. So the next bucket, for lack of a better term, is the infrastructure. It's the pipes and the wires and the utilities that we have. So some of the key points here, and it's not new to anybody, there is no municipal wastewater service in Jericho. Water and gas services is concentrated at Jericho Corners and Riverside. and there is also, runs up to the range up along Packard Road. That's the blue on the map you see here, is the extent of the Jericho Underhill Water District and the Champlain Water District service areas. And then the distribution network is also highlighted there. So, that is great, but that is kind of highlights part of the challenge here is that the lack of community infrastructure and particularly wastewater infrastructure is severely constraining our ability to create new and more diverse both housing and businesses in town that are affordable in the nearer village centers. We absolutely have to have alternatives to on-site septic systems to allow us to build more things closer together in these places, as some of the neighborhoods are, but don't necessarily meet current on-site septic requirements, perhaps because the rules have changed since they were built. Water service improvements are also needed in some places to support new businesses and mixed-use development. So particularly water pressure for fire service in mixed-use buildings, as well as buildings that support businesses that are more heavily water-dependent users. So thinking restaurants and food processing kinds of businesses that use more water. Their demand is different than, and their wastewater demand is different than the typical. And if we want to see those kinds of businesses expand, flourish in Jericho, we need to make sure that the infrastructure is there to support them. And I'll just make a note about water service. Mr. DeVos was here to talk about some community services. This doesn't at present say much of anything about private wells, whether the community or otherwise, or community private septic systems. This is really focused on these public and quasi-municipal service for utility providers, I'll say. So I'll kind of leave it at that, and you can tell me if that should be different or not. A couple of other things, and this is stuff that I've just pulled out from some of the sections of the existing plan as being particular issues, but weatherization is an important component when we think about energy use, but it's a slow process in existing buildings, and getting people to do it and providing the incentives necessary to help them do that at the time that they're going to do that kind of work. As is new construction, which is one of the best ways of making sure that we're using modern materials and modern technologies to reduce our energy consumption. You know, again, that's a slow process, and it's a slower process because we don't have the infrastructure to support that kind of new and concentrated mixed-use development. Something that I experienced this week, and maybe Sabina did too, but Vermont Electric Co-op reliability is a challenge in the rural parts of towns. When we had a bit of a microburst a couple of days ago and lost the power on Skunk Hollow Road because a lot of trees came down really fast out of nowhere. And I found it interesting that the town plan highlights that as a specific issue, and understanding that these parts of the town, you know, folks having some sort of an alternative generator on alternative supply is a good idea. So I simply highlighted that. And the reliability of cell coverage is also spotty. I've got a couple of maps here to show related to this, and the first one has to do with solar potential and wind potential. Now, you will recall that the most current part of the current town plan is the energy chapter that was done fairly recently to include this energy chapter as a new requirement under state law. And I would anticipate for the most part that chapter's not gonna change much, or that the information, the data is being updated. These maps are new based on the data that the Regional Planning Commission has. But the overall philosophy, the overall priorities, none of that stuff I would anticipate changing unless I hear that there is something that really needs to be different here. But the map on the left is solar potential, basically highlighting two different areas where there is good potential for solar generation, and the areas that are on red, the darkest color on the map, are the greatest potential with the fewest number of constraints. And the same goes for the wind map that's on the right. The darker purple areas are areas with the least amount of constraints to siting wind generation. And then, so this is, and you probably heard about this, it's been in the news quite a bit lately. The Department of Public Service drove like 2/3 or 3/4 of all the roads in the state of Vermont testing cell phone coverage. And against the claims of the various telecommunication providers of what great service they offer. So this is the map I pulled offline highlighting Jericho, and the upper left map is one is calls. So the one on the upper left is speed of the service when it was tested, and the lower map is the proportion of calls that were dropped, with red being the worst speeds and red being the most calls that were dropped or never connected at all. So you can see there are, particularly out National Road, there are service challenges when it comes to cell coverage, which, you know, for more and more people is their primary, if their only means of help.
Is the blank space no service?
The blank space is areas that they weren't testing because it's not along a road.
So no
And-
service.
So, yes, there's probably some service there, but you know, they were literally driving in their calls, you know, trying to place calls. With the understanding that for the most part, most people live within some proximity of the roads. So I think that was some useful data. So priorities. Prioritize and facilitate the creation and expansion of community infrastructure in and around our community centers. So, Eric, you asked the question about how far people will walk, and I think you've seen parts of this image before, but the rings around the village areas are at both a 5-minute and a 10-minute walk. And you can see for the most part, they cover a pretty large area. You know, if you're willing to walk, you know, 11 minutes, you know, you can get even farther. But these are the places in kind of increasing proportion as you move towards the center, where the priorities ought to be for the location of water and wastewater in public water service to support compact mixed-use development.
David, what's the, it's not like a circle, but it looks more like a polygon, like a,
The hatched areas.
yeah.
That's an area that I'm kind of toying with, and I want us to talk about in a little bit more detail of, that's around the high school. So
Mhm.
that's kind of the intersection of Packard and Brown's Trace, particularly running up Packard Road where there is Champlain water, there is or will be Vermont gas, and that kind of all creates, you know, this again comes back to the point I made about infrastructure should serve the development pattern, not define the development pattern. And, you know, whether or not Packard Road is where you want the development to occur as a community, that's where the infrastructure is. So as a result, that's where that development is most likely to occur. So we can talk about that when we talk about future land use tonight. I would like to actually have a future discussion focused just on the future land use map, which I'll show you a little bit later. Stormwater, again, has to be prepared to adapt to changing climate. So that's an important part of this infrastructure. And when we build compact mixed-use development, it requires, I'll use the word urban because it's a much more urban context. So it requires more urban solutions to how we manage stormwater. Not big urban solutions, but more hardscape in some cases than we would do in a very rural area. But again, it needs to be prepared for higher volumes, higher velocities. Again, this is a priority, and the current plan is prioritizing conservation and weatherization and the expanded use and generation of clean and renewable sources of energy where suitable. It's not suitable everybody, everywhere, from a generation perspective, and it's not suitable everywhere from kind of a land use and development perspective, because you don't want to, disrupt wetlands and forested habitat and things like that. But there, as you've seen from those other maps, there are places where it is suitable and there are few constraints. And when we are building, whatever we're building, the location, setting, design, and material choices need to think about the long-term costs and consumption of energy for everything. So that's infrastructure.
Okay, comments and questions about infrastructure from the planning commission?
I'm sort of an addition,
Mhm.
but it's nice to add in VEC, but I think putting in Green Mountain Power would be good too, because all those lines that are overhead are just as vulnerable, whether they're GMP or VEC, to being knocked down. So that-
They are, but what was interesting, and I hadn't thought of it until I read it in the town plan, was because of the history of VEC, a lot of their lines run kind of off of the roads through the woods. A lot of GMP's lines run along the roads. So they are, when you look at their reliability statistics, it's a significant difference. And it's like, yeah, I've been a VEC customer for as long as I've lived in Jericho, and our power goes out with some regularity. Yeah, I guess that's why. But to your point, and particularly when you get into,
Along
village
Packer Road,
settings,
where they're all underneath trees.
burying overhead lines becomes, more of a desire.
And I wonder if it would be beneficial on your wastewater map to sort of include on there where the community septic systems are, with the anticipation that if at some point we do get efficient wastewater for the town, we know where those community septics are, so we can tag those in and either treat them as part of the town's overall or as an additional source that would feed into the town's overall wastewater system.
So I'm not sure, and I will investigate whether or not to have a good data source for those private community septic as well as wells. Maybe the wells, I've seen some data around,
Wouldn't the state
wells.
permitting
Yeah,
database,
right.
at least for newer ones?
But as whether or not they have them, mapped in such a way. It may just be a list.
Do you know the Agency of Natural Resources online atlas?
Mhm.
They might have a layer in there. Have you played around with that?
I have played around from both the Regional Planning Commission and the BCGI site. I'm not going to the ANR site specifically, but I will investigate those.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Our septic is licensed and we have to renew.
I think they have a layer with
Inspected. I
wells.
think it's every year
Right, for your homeowners.
for the homeowners association here, and they do know what the capacity is of that system. They may not know exactly where it's located on the map, but they know that we have one and what its capacity is.
Well, also, what about the village wastewater study? Isn't doing the whole town, but that would be a good data source for at least the village center
Right.
focused.
And that's something I think we
System.
want to incorporate more directly,
Right.
once it's.
Actually, that was my question, which is, don't we need sort of like a big placeholder on this list for feathering in the results of the wastewater study? Which won't be done by the first draft of for July, but potentially would be done by the time the town plans go into the select board.
Yes, but we know that the priorities are in and around these village areas, and that takes us the next step to how more precisely where that might work. So to the extent to which we can pull from that kind of as this process moves forward and kind of utilize particularly its final recommendations in a final draft of the plan, absolutely. Because again, we want to be as specific as possible.
And again, to the other point, if we're looking at mapping out the resources and what can be done with them, knowing the community septics that are within the coverage area of the wastewater plan will give us a much better sense of what else is there that we can either increase the volume, increase the efficiency of the system, or exclude those from.
Right,
including
you're
deficit.
right, because the engineer has that on their radar.
Right.
Exactly.
That's actually part of the study
Yeah.
is looking at all of the systems within those study areas, understanding what their kind of status is, their lifespan or lack thereof, and whether or not they would be contributing towards some sort of a larger community system. So a lot of that data is part of that study for sure.
That was sort of the nitpicky stuff I had earlier. Otherwise, I think we're on target with everything. I would like to see more about wastewater as the infrastructure push that we have to have,
Mhm.
because so much else of what we want to do as a town can't be done without it.
Absolutely.
And also the water pressure, water for fire suppression.
Yeah.
That has been a recurring theme that we've heard from folks.
Yeah.
A higher level comment, I know these are goal statements, these are not like about implementation, but I'm noticing that I'm starting to wonder about the use of the word facilitate, because that to me speaks to that, the how are we gonna do this as the town? And some of these things I see like are in the purview of town government. And the likelihood that they could be successful may be greater, and some of these things are harder to get to as a town, like the material choices that are made by private developers. And I recognize that they're important for decrease in energy consumption, but I'm just, you know, that's more based on incentives, I think, for developers. And given everything else that the town has to do within this plan, I guess this is not an equal list for me, like.
Oh, yeah,
Like some of these
absolutely.
things are like super important,
Yeah.
and I feel like it's within the town purview, and the others are like, yes, and.
Yeah.
Yeah, Susan, and then, sorry, that's why I was Wendy before thinking like, I do feel like it would be very helpful for us as a planning commission at some point. To be able to do some prioritization of the priorities.
Yeah.
And therefore, what are the values or criteria we would use for prioritizing our priorities? And one that I hear you saying is, and Chris was like, what can the town do and what should we push the town to do? What is most strategic and what is, you know, sort of, like just name those. So David, I don't know if that's part of your process with us eventually is the prioritization of the priorities. But I know that one of our goals was not to have a town plan that had so many goals and priorities that nothing got done.
Right. And this particularly gets to the part of the plan that is are the action steps. And the action steps prioritized by time period. What are you going to do right now? And what are you going to do in the medium term? And what are you going to do in the long term? And that's really the place where you're deciding about what are those priorities and how do we put as fine a point on them as we can. We'll have to I'll have a list and I'll have to take a crack at it, but that's where your input's going to be critical.
Because I think where we're coming from, not to speak for everybody, but it's sort of like, if we can't put a really fine point on it, then it shouldn't be in the plan. It should be somewhere else in a document. Like, I would feel totally successful if 8 years from now, there's nothing in our new plan that gets carried forward.
Yes.
Except it would be great, like, we can go back and look at the library of all the great ideas that we had now that don't get into our plan because we put them in the parking lot. We put them on the queue, but our plan is short and actionable and is not, I know continuity is so important in planning, but I'm kind of like want to swing the pendulum the other way and be like, we don't need continuity. We need what's new, what's different, what are we gonna do? Everything else is resource information. Everything else is volume 2 in your mind, or some other library of material, but not necessarily coming along for the ride with the plan.
So I'm just gonna push back on that a bit, because when it comes to kind of your goals and policies as a community, that's where the continuity is really important. And that's where having statements that kind of state, this is kind of what our objectives are as a community and the things that we want to have happen in our community. It's what are you going to do about that? Where I'm 100% where you're at. And if you can list those things, of what are you going to do to help people prioritize reducing long-term cost and consumption of energy, while you have that as a kind of priority and a policy statement in the plan, what are you going to do about it in the near, medium, and long term? And if you can accomplish all those things, great. That's where that needs to happen. But you do need to state your broad objectives here and kind of that policy
I
framework.
think what would help me for continuity's sake is when I look at a statement like the first one that says we're going to facilitate the creation of new compact mixed-use development. What's missing is the person or the person or the entity that will benefit from that. And that benefit is what provides the continuity. So if I were to edit that statement, I would want to see I don't want to facilitate the creation of mixed use development. I want to enable people to live close in a close-knit community where they can walk around, get to where they need to know, and get to know their neighbors. It's exactly the same thing. It's just that your language is very professional because you have the background. We're like the lay people trying to bridge the gap between you and all the voters. Basically, you are going to be supporting these investments. People aren't, I think, less likely to support an investment that facilitates creation of development. And they're more likely to support creation of like, oh, I could live in a place like that.
And like we talked about sustaining the neighborhood that we have. The Jericho Center neighborhood is not sustainable right now with wastewater and potable water.
Right.
Yeah, if I could go back to David, just, I think what is not visible when we go through this is the layers of the plan. And there are different layers of planning that you're trying to walk us through. And so I would just respectfully say, we need a vision statement. Like we just actually articulated that we wanted to be a vibrant community that enables people to walk, and this is what it looks like. Our priorities are longer term because we know it takes forever for certain things and we want them to hold forever. But then so we have to have something that has the long term expectations. And then the third is the action plan. I think, David, what we're feeling anxious about is that making whatever, there's like the big fluffy, there's the wonky, and then there's the action. And we need all three
Yes,
in order.
absolutely.
In order. And so I would put us right now, we're in this wonky place. We're not in the vision place. And we're not in the action place. We're in this really wonky, like this is what lays the groundwork for moving from vision to action.
Which is okay,
Right.
I think that's
Absolutely.
exactly where we need to be at this point in time.
Yeah.
And this discussion is really about infrastructure today.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
did you guys read the
Yeah.
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 So for each
I like
one of
it.
these, you should be thinking about, as we go forward, we want to be thinking about exactly what are we going to do to make that happen? Who's going to be responsible for it and when?
Right.
Mhm.
And like Wendy said, if it's not gonna be on the town's list, then I think we have to ask ourselves, should it be in the plan? Unless we are gonna develop incentives or have, zoning benefits or tax benefits or some other policy benefit, then great idea, but maybe it's in a different part.
Yeah.
Well, if it's not on the town's list, and we believe it should be, then it's our job to make sure it gets on that list.
Right.
So it's not they get to tell us, we have a role in this as well. Of saying this is what we think should happen.
Oh, yeah, that's totally what I'm. got out of that.
What's our third category? David?
Put things on the time, townships that may not be.
I think it's coming.
There's one more piece to this. And I would call it education and community well-being.
Oh my God, are those your kids?
They are my kids. I just thought it was a great picture of the sign with little kids in front of a school bus. This happened to me like, it was a long time ago. But these are, again, there's some hard infrastructure here, school buildings itself and the like, but these are a lot more of the softer social elements here. And certainly amongst the most important thing is a highly regarded school system, which is a really important part of why we all live here, what attracted us to live here, what attracts people to want to live here. We have a diversity of outdoor recreational opportunities. And there's a lot of social and community stuff that goes on in Jericho. There are lots of different groups and organizations doing all kinds of different things, which when you wrap all these things together, it creates that thing we call community that is so important to us. But what are the challenges? Numbers of school-age children is declining. That has implications for a lot of stuff, but particularly how we fund our schools, the quality of our schools, therefore the attractiveness of our schools going forward. A lot of that is driven by housing for new families and teachers is unaffordable. People with young children cannot afford to move here. And we all have lots of stories of people we know, friends and family who are in that struggle right now. While there's a lot of different groups of people doing a lot of different things, there are very few gathering spaces in Jericho, whether they're public spaces like this one or the community center up in the center, or private spaces like JCAT and other places where people congregate. And there are no real indoor recreational opportunities, particularly for folks who are mobility challenged and maybe can't get out in the woods, or little kids in inclement weather and things like that. So I've heard of this, desire for, indoor recreation opportunities. So I simply put it to the list for you to ultimately prioritize. So again, the creation of new housing opportunities is critical to the success of our schools and to the community's workforce, not just the teachers, but everywhere around. The interconnection of sidewalks and paths and trails for outdoor recreation is a really important element. I mentioned this before, for physical activity and our physical health, and as related to that, our mental health. Being able to, for many of us that get outside or try to get outside and exercise every day, we do that for mental health as much, if not more, than for physical health. And the creation of new gathering spaces. Again, places where people can come together. And again, this is also a very important mental health component of people getting together and sharing meals, sharing conversations, sharing interests. And some of this comes about through expanding business opportunities, but also, creating other kinds of what are known as third places. You have where you live, you have where you work, and you have that third place where you come together. Yes, oftentimes they're called bars, but there are other ways that people gather too. So that's the last slide I have on this piece.
Are government services another category?
No, that would, government services, it's not. Does it fit in here? Maybe not, maybe it needs to be a separate one.
Yeah, I think that's an important
Mhm.
conversation to have.
And when you say that, what are the things that you have specifically in mind?
Well, structure of government, accountability of government.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a lot of, talk about looking at our current select board. Do we have the capacity? Does town government have the capacity to do the things that are being prioritized? Whether it's an elected board, volunteer board, or staff?
So this is something we've talked about a lot, and I've struggled with, how does that fit? Where does it fit in the plan? And maybe that's just that it just needs to kind of stand out on its own.
Yeah. Can we table that for a second because we have a separate topic around the outline?
Yeah.
If that's okay with you. Sure. All right, so back to this particular education, community well-being priorities. Any comments or questions from the planning commission about this particular topic of what David just presented?
Well, I guess for me personally, like the creation of a new housing opportunity is affordable and missing middle, like it's just, that is like the top priority, it just should be in bold, a bigger font.
Yeah.
It's not equal to creating new gathering places, although I know that's important, but that's so important.
I have to chuckle when you say that, because the more I think about this and the more I kind of talk to myself about this, I kind of come to this place where, aside from keeping the lights on and keeping people safe, there is no higher priority of anything that the town should do over the course of the next 10 years, but figure out every possible way it can to build housing. Period, the end, stop the presses on everything else.
Yes.
But
Yeah. So you're done with the plan.
right, but a plan can't just say
I know, I
that.
know. Right.
So, but,
But to that point, I think it's important to emphasize the declining school population, because that has a real financial impact on everybody currently and in the future in a variety of ways. But that is, I think, a major piece of leverage for the town contributing money, real money to the housing solution.
yeah. Do you know of a source of where that is clearly explained, where somebody has kind of clearly laid out that argument?
I know someone who could,
Mhm,
Edie Granning.
mhm.
Okay,
If I could jump in, just going back to I know we're not talking about the organization of the plan.
We are not.
No.
We are not.
So are you about to do it?
no, we're going to in a minute.
No. I actually, what I'm going to speak of though is I can see how every other part of the plan fits in these three objectives and these three priorities. And it speaks to what we care about. I think the piece that I don't know what there's something about the last one that I want to be a little bit more robust about the opportunities for social interaction. And because there's a piece there, I was thinking, as we talked about young families, there's also our aging population.
Mhm.
And if we're thinking ahead about the kinds of making Jericho a place where people can age in place and with healthy and supported and in a community that they love. There's a piece in that last bullet that's there that to me would speak to what we're trying to create for ourselves. And that would then feed into why we need certain social services or why we need certain connectivity and why we need businesses, but there's something there, and I don't have an answer, but it really feels to me like, again, that your question, Susan, about like, who's it for and why? I want to make sure that we are recognizing, we have a lot of people who want to age here and want to age here and with their families and with their grandchildren and all of that. And yet we need to create those times, those places and supports for that.
No, I think that's a great point, and there is a whole chapter, if you will, just on housing, where a lot of that point gets made, but I think, and also appreciating that you have to have the infrastructure, the
Right.
supportive infrastructure for all of us
Right?
that, are looking to age in place.
Right, and your mention of having indoor spaces fits here too, because as people become less mobile or more tentative with changing weather patterns, indoor gatherings really important.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think I agree with everything. I wonder if it's appropriate to add in events. It's not just enough to have the space. You have to have a reason to go there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay,
looking at the
thank you.
time, I think that we should, if this works for you, David, would be to invite public comment on this particular, what you just talked about, and then talk about the outline, because the outline, I feel like is kind of administrative and we can hash around it also among all of us in email. And also say the planning commission, we have the luxury of, you can email David, you can talk to him on the phone. This is not our only opportunity, but for people who've joined us tonight, I want to make sure we have enough, give them enough opportunity. So I'd like to allow like at least 10, 12 minutes now for discussion with people who are here.
Yep.
Maybe since we had people raising their hand on the Zoom, can
you stop
we
screen
go
share?
to the Zoom?
Yeah, thanks.
Can we
Unless you
see the
still need it.
screen to see who has their hand
Yep.
raised? Okay. Great. So now we haven't been able to see all of you. Thank you very much for coming to the meeting. And I'd like to invite you guys to react to what you just, or ask questions about what you just heard. If you wouldn't mind trying to limit your time to talking about infrastructure as it relates to the town plan, as David just outlined, which is mobility priorities, physical infrastructure, education and community facilities. And also, if you would just limit yourself to about 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll go around again if we have a little bit more time. Frederica Keating.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for letting me speak. You know so much about everything that I'm going to talk about already. I just wanted to frame what was said most recently in terms of prioritizing infrastructure in the walkable areas around the village centers. And I want to just go back to a slide that you had up about 2-3 slides ago that showed what is walkable within 15 minutes or 10 or 15 minutes. Remember those red circles? The slide with the red circles? I just pulled up a zoning map for myself just to look at the zoning map in relationship to that. And you would think that that's where we would have village center and village zoning, and thus be thinking about infrastructure in those areas. But you would be wrong. If you look at the zoning map, that's actually includes a lot of 3-acre zoning and 10-acre zoning. And why this is important is that 3-acre zoning and 10-acre zoning housing that's built in those areas is not going to be affordable to people with median income. So housing in larger lots is not going to be affordable. So there is going to be some thought needed to address what people, if you think about creating housing as your top priority, what that 15-minute radius means in terms of the housing, the zoning that's there right now. And that's just one argument to be made. There's a lot more arguments to be made about how to create affordable housing. But that's just what came to my mind when I saw those concentric circles that you were drawing.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Meg,
Hi, everybody. Thanks for all your work. It seems to me that we're looking in the next 8 years towards two significant impacts. Oh, by the way, I live in the center and I'm very new to Jericho, so I don't have a lot of history here. So I'm just speaking to the now. If we're looking to the next 8 years into the future, you're talking about two potential significant impacts on a town. One is the increased housing and growth that you want to see, and two is the future of climate change. And both of these have a really, really big impact on infrastructure and our ability to handle them both. And infrastructure costs so much money, and it's not sexy. It's not easy to sell to taxpayers. So could we possibly use some of this big money that we have gotten as a result of, this one-time COVID money to do some of these big ticket things that the town needs to do, and get as much help from the state as we can, but grab this opportunity? That's just my only question.
okay, thank you. Chuck,
I'd like to see an additional infrastructure category, and that is the town capability. It's a legitimate form of infrastructure, and to get what we want to get done, we need skills that we don't have now in project management, public-private partnerships, public finance, development of funding sources, acquisitions of the rights of way, contract management, financial projections. We don't have any of those as real strengths in the in the town. All the towns around us have some form of sewage, but Jericho, except for Underhill, which is has the same sort of lack of town infrastructure. But to get things done, we have the same town government that we had 50 years ago, 60 years ago. We have a town administrator and 3 select board members and someone in planning and someone in zoning. That's what we had 50 years ago. And I think we just need to step up and say that is, that's infrastructure. I also, this plan and the zoning is just an awesome responsibility. We have used this to restrict who can live here, where they live, and how they live. And I think, we really need to, any justifications for restrictions need to be really supported. The bus study done for the town did, as David say, encourage more demand management as public transportation. They also said that we need 4,500 people in Jericho centers to support a fixed bus stop. We have about 1,000. To put that in perspective, to get the additional people we need to support a minimally viable bus stop, according to the Chittenden County Regional Planning Authority, we need 35 apartment buildings with 50 apartments each. So if we're talking about plans for a fixed bus stop or multiple bus stops, we need to have a parallel indication that we need this many people to make it happen, and we're going to need this many apartment buildings, and this is the density we need to make it happen. Otherwise, I think we need to be leaning into the more distributed system that has been recommended to us by the experts that we hired to develop a plan. The shortage of school children is unique to towns with our zoning in terms of Chittenden County. The school systems in Fairfax are busting, wide open. In Cambridge, other towns, Bolton is saving the MMU school district. Towns that have not prevented young families from coming here. This is a self-inflicted thing. It's not something we have to passively accept. Little children don't live in big houses. And we have restricted, we've restricted Jericho basically to suburban sprawl, big houses on big lots. That's why we have a shortage of children in the school systems. I'll wait till I can come around again. Thank you.
okay, thank you.
And Susan, I just want to say I really support a lot of what you said earlier.
Whoa, thank God. Okay. Anybody else on the Zoom at the moment? Doesn't look like it. How about here in the room? Anybody have any comments or questions on infrastructure? Jim, can you come forward to the mic, please?
I'll be candid, I'm a little frustrated with what I'm hearing. As I've aged, I can see the sunset of my life and I'd like to see something material and significant happen. I think in 2 hours, I could accomplish more with creating affordable housing in Jericho than we have over the past 2 years. Need to identify the resources where you can put effluent. It's really simple. You go to the state soil maps and you identify where you can put effluent. And then you put into your town map that that resource is a restricted resource. It's available for municipal purposes in partnership with private development. Get your checkbook out and start buying easements to be able to create small scale ground-based sewage treatment. You're never going to put a municipal wastewater system in Jericho that distributes its wastewater into a navigable waterway. That is done. It's one of the worst things that we've ever done, because if you put bad stuff into the water, it's going to end up in what you're drinking. So we can move the needle and move it significantly. Off of Morgan Road, the developer has just built a single common septic system for 9 houses because it's a lot less expensive than distributing all that sewage and all that infrastructure over the very difficult terrain where those 9 houses are. You can find anything you want to know about any existing septic system that's been built under the state wastewater code in the state wastewater database. You can go to anything that's got a homeowners association, Google the address, and find its wastewater plan. The town of Jericho has a big wastewater system for all of its schools. All of the homeowners associations have wastewater permits. You need to create a town wastewater czar. They know how to treat it, they know where they can treat it, and the town has the magic sauce that none of us private people have. They own the interconnection right-of-ways. So now the town's a developer. They got 380 grand invested to Railroad Circle, but there's no sewage there. So they have to take their right-of-ways and identify where they could put water after they treated it. You can take gravity, bring it down to a pump station, and then treat it, because Vermont has now, almost 15 years ago, created creative sewage treatment systems. And if you Google Arenco Advantax, it's one of the greatest things you can do because it uses aerobics to treat wastewater. I implemented it almost 20 years ago on the lake, because the worst thing we can do is to put more water that's treated into the rivers. And I'll end this conversation. Do you know how Burlington improved its environmental conservation and treatment of its wastewater systems? Because its wastewater systems, like many, have infiltration from stormwater. But in Burlington, they specialized it. They plugged the stormwater system into the wastewater system. So every time it rains, its municipal sewage system gets flooded out. And instead of going back and fixing the infrastructure, stopping the infiltration from the flawed pipes, separating the stormwater from the sewage treatment system, do you know what the geniuses in the state of Vermont did? We extended the discharge pipe 1 mile further out in the lake, because the solution to pollution in Vermont is dilution. So looking to the state of Vermont, any of your large municipalities to solve any of these problems, all you can look for is to find how not to get it done. The private developers and the people who have problems solve this. Chuck said it, public-private partnerships. You have a model on Morgan Road. You just permitted 9 upscale houses that start around 600 and probably go up from there. But they put 9 large homes into a common septic system. Within 6 months, the town of Jericho could do the identical thing for their 2 railroad circle projects. They could take all these little circles that they got and say, oh, the Rivers' property. Ever hear of that? Fabulous sands and gravels. It could take all of the sewage from Jericho Center and solve the polluted well problems. But you got to create, as Chuck said, organization, leadership, finite description, and get something done.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Anybody else? Right here now, otherwise. Chuck, I'll give you 1 more minute, but then we have to move on because we still have a whole nother topic with David White. Go.
Sure. In terms of the space between sort of action and planning, I think you can, in terms of like the specifics, I would, look at Riverside right now. We have a project that is basically going to be stopped because of zoning. And we could move it along quite a bit with with wastewater. And I think moving kind of from the vague aspirational document with 338 objectives to the specific kind of a thing that Susan was talking about, I think we can move it pretty far along towards specifics and saying we need to figure out how this elder housing project can happen in Riverside and put it in the plan with names and dates.
Okay, thank you. Outline.
Okay, just I do want to sort of pick up on what Jim was saying about hanging into all the community septics that are out there. It's a resource that if we don't take advantage of that, we're hurting ourselves.
Yeah, so I think you made that point earlier on. We know, Linda and I know from the wastewater study that is in fact part of their analysis is are there systems that can be expanded, and they are looking at a distributed model, meaning not distributing all the stuff to Lake Champlain, but like lots of larger than my septic and your septic, but more like Foothills and more like the Morgan Road. Like that does kind of seem to be an appealing model so far, but we're not septic design engineers, which is why the town hired the engineer.
Right.
So, okay, David.
Okay. So. You're not supposed to begin a presentation with an apology, but I'm going to do that because what we sent to you last week with an outline and kind of a framework for the plan. I was telling Linda and Susan that I had a lot more thought, maybe a bit of an epiphany over the weekend that I think hopefully brings us to a clearer place about how these different parts of the plan kind of fit together and work together. So I'm taking a bit of a shift from what I sent you, and you may have looked at over the weekend, but a lot of the bones are still the same. So kind of keep that basic framework in mind, but maybe some of the terms have changed and some of the topics have expanded. So I'm going to share my screen again. And so starting at and this may have been one of the slides that you got, but so overall looking at how I would envision or how I am envisioning this plan to play out. We have talked about quite a bit, and I'll just kind of summarize it here. The plan, we begin with the plans in 2 volumes. The first volume is really the kind of forward-looking action plan that has the kind of the vision, the policies, and ultimately the action items that the town wants to pursue going forward. This volume 2 is all of the background data and information, much of this taken right out of the existing plan, updated. A lot of the reference to a lot of the existing plans and studies that have already been done that still have relevance going forward, maps and appendices. So volume 1, volume 2. Our focus here is volume 1. What does the first part of the plan look like? My goal in all of this, and we'll see if we're able to achieve that, is that this part is like 30 pages long. It's pretty concise, and is easy for folks to kind of comprehend, get your heads around, and most importantly, really understand what are the priorities here. What are the most important things that the town is going to pursue? With that said, then, there are 4 parts to volume 1. First is kind of this broad community vision, and I'll talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail, and interlocking themes that kind of provide the kind of broad framework and sense of values and priorities that kind of guide the rest of the plan. The body of the plan itself, which you'll see here, now has 4 sections, not 3. A future land use plan, which then takes a lot of this stuff and places it on the ground, or at least the broad outlines for what kinds of things happen where. And then ultimately the implementation plan, which takes all of the actions, who's going to do what, when, where, and how, and prioritizes them into short-term, medium-term, and long-term actions. And that's kind of the key component here to being really clear about what are we actually going to do first. So the community vision, this is just kind of an example of it, but it's, the town plan has a broad vision statement. This is largely it. I may have tweaked some of the language and moved some things around a little bit for organizational purposes, but that's the idea, is that there is a broad vision statement for the town as a whole going forward over the long term. The next component of that, then, this is what I have referred to in the past as values, and I'm not sure whether the term values is creating confusion or not, but it's the notion that these are kind of some of the basic principles that are important to the community that really weave them with their way through every other part of this plan. And they help define what the priorities are. They help define what the guardrails are on kind of the decision-making process. When there's a conflict or a question, these are the kinds of things that we look to help discern, well, it says this is a priority and this is a priority, but there's some conflict between the two. Can we use these concepts and these tools to help us parse them out and decide where to go first? So stewardship of the land, of our history, of our climate, and of our community as a whole. And Susan has had some further iteration thoughts on this, and we can kind of talk about that as we go forward. But community, and this is the diversity, equity, and inclusion language, really. And that said, seeing the diversity statement that the DI committee came out with, it, did you say that's on your agenda?
It's on our agenda. I don't know that we'll get to it.
So whatever that is, if it's not finished at the end of the day, that ought to be right up here in the front of the book, right? It's a guiding document. Sustainable and adaptable. This is getting into the decision-making process and the planning process, that we are thinking of the long term. And we're also thinking about how different things fit together. That's the comprehensiveness of our decision-making. It's not just, we're just going to build housing, but not appreciate that, infrastructure is an issue and there are places that you can't put infrastructure and can't. You have to think about how all these pieces fit together. And that we're prepared for change. Change is inevitable across our climate, within our community, across within our economy and across our community, and we have to be prepared for that. That's really, being forward-looking, understanding what may or may not be coming at us, and being ready to adapt to that. And then the decision-making process itself, being well-informed, we use good information to guide decision-making, and that it's transparent. And I'm going to go a little bit out on a limb here with this comment, that the process is open for all to observe and participate where and when appropriate. I include that final statement there because it's not always appropriate for everybody in town to participate at the minute level of detail in every decision. That's why you have an elected town government. The select board, now and in the future, they are elected by the citizens of Burlington, of Jericho, to make decisions and to make hard decisions. And that decision-making process needs to be transparent, everybody to see and how it works, but not everybody's opinion is going to carry the day. And at some point, they just have to make a decision. So there are limits on that, how much everybody can get involved in the minutia of every decision at every step of the way. I think that's an important point to put out there, because in our highly engaged communities, people lose sight of that and think that everybody should be part of every single decision, and it can't work that way. So those are the interlocking themes. Then the plan, this third section of the plan, is divided into 4 separate chapters, if you will, with then sub-chapters highlighting what are the kind of priority topics within that. So first being, this is my own personal bias, we can't be here at all if we don't have a natural environment to live within. So I always start with the natural environment. So protecting our environment, the natural systems and services, that's a lot of water. Those systems are essential to how we sustain life on this planet. So that's very important. The integrity and diversity of the habitats, and how it provides a natural playground for our community. Providing housing choice. The key to building more housing is providing choices for a wide range of families at a wide range of incomes and ages and locations. You're never going to meet the needs of everybody if you only build one thing. The Model T concept didn't work. That's why we have so many different cars today. So we're creating options for all income stages in life, household types. We're reducing costs to build and to live, because it's not just the creation of that housing. People have to be able to live in it and maintain it. So that in part becomes the context. It's cheaper to build and compact. It's cheaper to own. It's typically cheaper to buy in compact, walkable neighborhoods, using sustainable design and materials where possible. And ultimately, we're going to have to create a lot of partnerships in order to meet the needs of particularly diverse arrangements of income. We have to build more market rate units, and it's going to take help to be able to do that. Again, partnerships, working with the development community, the builder community, private property owners, and as well as working with nonprofit housing entities to create that long-term affordability. So those are the priorities. And again, in thinking about these things, then when you highlight, then what are the priorities that we talked about, like under the infrastructure section, then we'll finally get to, okay, exactly what we're going to do. We need to make as specific as we can these types of changes to the zoning regulations in order to make those things happen. I can list 3 or 4, right now. Maybe we want to list more. But as an example, growing our local economy, conserving and supporting working lands. We have a lot of working land out there. Much of it is lying fallow, just being brush hogged once a year. But it remains an important resource for the future to have more agriculture in our community in one form or another, and supporting the farms and the businesses that are working the land by creating spaces where those products can come to market, where those products can have value added to them and be sold in the community. Fostering entrepreneurship, again, creating places where people can establish new businesses, can grow new businesses, get the business out of their basement. This is Showman Diamonds here. Here's a great example of having a place to move these businesses that have grown beyond the confines of a household kitchen or a garage, but want to stay in Jericho and should stay in Jericho, and building those vibrant urban centers. And then finally, making the connections. That's the second thing we were just talking about tonight. Mobility, infrastructure, education, and community well-being. And I totally get the point about government being a component of that. So 4 chapters with sub areas then for each one of them. Each one of these kind of has its own kind of vision and goal statements to go along with it, along with the narrative that describes these various priorities, these topic areas, and lists a number of priorities. Specific actions don't get highlighted here because they come at the end. So the next part is future land use. So a description of 3 different parts of town in kind of broad strokes, areas where we want to see more compact mixed use development, areas where residential infill would be expected, in areas where we're really looking to, the priority is to conserve natural resources and working lands. This is not the town's zoning map, but it's built on the town's zoning map. It is intended to inform a future zoning map as it evolves. A future land use map should not be a zoning map, because the zoning map is static to that point in time. It needs to be more conceptual and more visionary and more forward looking. So that's what I've tried to create here, with the 3 villages and the commercial district highlighted in the darkest red as being the highest priority of place for compact mixed use development served by community infrastructure. The concentric circle around that is a 5-minute walk from those places. And then the orange circle is then a 10-minute walk from those places. So kind of as you move farther and farther from those centers, the priority for that and the degree to which there's infrastructure and mixed uses and compactedness dissipates. And then you've got yellow for what are the residential districts and the conservation and forested areas. A couple of things that are on here that are new and different are, I mentioned this before to Linda's question, the area around the high school is an area that is served by infrastructure. It's an area that is likely to be served by more infrastructure. And it's a place where we ought to be having more of a conversation. And we have had some conversations about perhaps do we do differently there. And I don't want to necessarily have that conversation tonight, but I want to, as I said, at a future meeting, let's talk about this specifically. A couple of other places I highlight here, just as an FYI, open farmland along Lee River, particularly along the southwest side of Lee River. If that's an area that can be kept open and its development potential can be transferred someplace else, that would be an important thing to have happen. As well as then a large block of contiguous forest habitat between Skunk Hollow and the center. That is likely to emerge as part of some of the natural resource data updates that the conservation board is working.
I think we need to stop here and just ask the planning commission. So this is a little bit different than what David sent us. Maybe if you could go back to the previous slide.
Yeah.
And you want comments now, but also people can think about it more, muse on it a little bit more, and give David feedback through email or calling him. But I would like to just get kind of a read of the room.
Yeah.
Are people feeling better about this? Is significantly different than the outline we looked at 6 weeks ago. If what's missing, what strikes you as like on point, other ways that you had imagined that maybe it would be organized.
Dana, can you go back to the slide right before that? I'm trying to, just for a minute, please. The one that had the
graphic or the vision?
that was a graphic.
This one?
No, I'm sorry, one more. And we won't have to say it, no, not
One
that
more-
one.
that
That
one.
one.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
so the plan chapters,
Yeah,
those are what are sussed out a little bit further.
Yeah, those
Correct.
4 blocks.
Okay, and then the future land use was the last slide.
right.
That was the map.
Okay.
That we just looked at.
Right, okay, thank you.
So, and a clarifying, so there's the big vision and interacting themes, and then for each chapter has its own vision related to the topic.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So this is really just the community vision interlocking themes. Setting us up for each of the smaller chapters. as we
Yes,
go through.
Yeah.
exactly. So when you get to this
Kind of
part,
what you were talking about.
Yeah.
this is,
Structure.
aside from the future land use plan, which is one of the most important components of the plan, period. This is the guts. This is the heart. This is the guts of the plan. And I think this kind of outline makes it much easier for somebody to see what are the priorities here.
Right, so David responded to the discussion we had at our last meeting where we were like, let's just call a spade. This is what we care about. That should be the call outs. So, my feedback to David, because I had a preview of this epiphany, was just that, I didn't necessarily feel like we needed themes to be really separate and called out, that it seemed like these guts without a lot of extraneous would probably be good. And also Wendy had done some work on the outline about a month ago. And I saw a way of weaving them together, taking kind of the best of some Wendy's ideas, which fit perfectly into the structure that David was suggesting. But I did see a 5th topic, which would be governance. So I do think that instead of 4, I think we might like to have it be 5. And so,
At this level.
yes. at
So
this
not
level.
a part of making the connections, but actually,
Because what
bringing
we
it up.
want to focus on are the changes, not preparing for changes only, but also the changes that we're gonna make, that we're gonna drive, that we're gonna like kick ass and take names. That's the mindset. So Wendy had created this really nice structure, creating a resilient community, which to me is number 1, protecting the environment.
You want me to share that? And I pulled it up. That's what.
That's okay, because I don't think we have time, so I can follow up in email, but
Okay.
creating a welcoming and inclusive community is where housing fits. creating a vibrant community is where the economy fits, and creating a connected community is where connections fit, and just kind of meshing them around a little bit. And I think the themes then just come right in here. They don't need their own 10 pages. They could just be supporting here, because your themes around stewardship and community are here anyway. Otherwise, it's going to be too repetitive, I think, if you have them like themes separate from the guts. And then the last thing would be, I don't know if this is the right wording, but creating a strategic community, because we didn't like the word strategic last time we met, but just for now, creating a strategic community where you enable stewardship through effective government, volunteer networks, transparent decision-making, because that's big. So
Yes.
it needs its own punch.
You want to bring it up to, in this space, kind of to the highest level.
Right, right.
They give it
So I
that kind of
thought
prominence.
Wendy's view was inspirational and had a common language. But it fits perfectly with this view. So the good news is I feel like we're coalescing around the same basic big topics.
And,
So-
and actually, if you had it as governance and civic engagement, so you
Yeah.
have the two pieces together as the fifth.
Right,
A lot of what you have is the themes are about sort of fit in one or the other of those, right? So using good data to drive decision-making, thinking about sustainability, like a lot of those really fit in that combination of
So take
governance.
these
yes,
and rather than them standing on their own,
right. Or trying to.
they're become part and parcel to these.
Yes, because most of them will fit in most of these, but then you don't have to contrive a reason to repeat community stewardship in each of these. That would be 4 times 5,
Right.
20 repetitive statements that are not needed
Yeah.
necessarily.
The other thing, David, that where the themes might be helpful is in the vision.
Mhm.
Like the
Yeah.
overarching vision. It may be that we look, as you did a beautiful job of pulling together a number of the vision statements that have been, sort of put forth over time. And they are verbose.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I could see how we might want a vision statement that is slightly more focused and thematic. And not just sort of this long rambling everything. Right. So that would be another thing. If we wanted to take on. And I'd be happy to do that. Like that's where my brain went. If there's some sort of taking a look at our existing vision statements with the themes, and then what we don't want to lose, that I think you pointed out earlier, is we are moving in a direction as a community around diversity, equity, and inclusion. You had it as a theme, but that's the only one I'm worried about having it drop out. I would like to have it in the vision statement and then woven in lots of places, because it is something that we hear a lot about. It's something that if we don't pay attention to, it won't happen. And we don't want to segment it to like one little piece of the plan.
Yeah.
That would be my only
Right,
concern.
yeah.
Well, I think making it part of the vision statement, and this is where I was uncertain when I first saw it, is like, so is this something that has been kind of embraced and adopted by the town as its statement? It has, or it will be?
Select board voted on in April.
They have it.
It's right on the homepage.
Yeah, so what I just didn't know is like, so is this like
Right.
final seal?
Just like our housing resolution is gonna be. So we have to stop this conversation here and move on to our next topic, because
Okay.
I want to get that.
That's very helpful, thank you.
Okay.
And
Thank
yes,
you, David.
This
Very
is-
please
awesome.
email me with other thoughts or comments you have along these.
Laurel, I'm sorry, I'm not.
I would suggest from everything you all said, that the housing bubble that you have here has to be top left of this document. Because being over here on the right, if this is the presentation.
It's not. This is just for
Yeah.
discussion.
Right,
Yeah.
but however you ended up, several of you said the
This is the most
housing
Yes.
important, this is the most important.
and I don't see it as
Yeah.
most important than however this document evolves.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
All right, so we're going to close this topic and go on to the next topic, which is to approve the resolution as a recommendation to forward to the select board. So we are going to ask them to adopt the resolution in the same way that the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee asked them to adopt a statement. Right? Okay, so I would like to hear a motion to approve the resolution to recommend to the select board.
I will vote for that.
Okay,
I will second.
Sarah second. Any discussion?
Has it changed since we last saw it?
It has changed than when we last saw it based on the two comments from the last meeting. And those were to add in a time frame, which was added in as within 90 days of the final report on the wastewater study, a decision would be made about what would happen next. And the other was about resources and capacity and the ability to actually get something done by saying that the select board needed to not only decide, but also if it was going to do something, allocate appropriate resources.
Not,
Those were the
not
two
to drag
changes.
things out, but would we be remiss if we don't have it? We all look at it, make sure we're all agreeing. on the
Sure.
same thing.
You can do
Yeah,
it.
I have
Can we
it.
do that?
Yeah, I have it here.
I was gonna say, you emailed it.
Yeah,
I
so
did.
read it,
yes, agreed.
So I feel confident that it represents my understanding of. the
Yeah,
changes that
so hang on, I just
So
have to
those
get to
two-
the share screen so that people can see it at home. Here.
So I kind of feel like this is a little bit like the debt ceiling deal. Like, it's not perfect, it's not everything we wanted, we were balancing just delivering targets with also delivering action steps. So kind of like the debt ceiling with the cost cutting. Suspended.
Hope I'm not scrolling too
No,
fast.
you're going right to where the changes were, and actually, so the other change actually we did make is that as the planning commission requested, I think this came from Heidi. We put the directing the planning commission first on the list, even though they're not necessarily, directly in order, but that seemed the most logical. So we put bullet number 2 became bullet number 1. In bullet number 2, leading a process and within 3 months of receiving the 90% report is what they call it, to establish the next steps regarding municipal wastewater and identify required municipal resources, staffing, and capacity. So those are the changes that you guys requested. And then the other change related to the third from the bottom bullet, align the town's budget and capital plan to support policies and investments which will enable development to meet these targets. That kind of came out of the discussion, subject to town meeting procedures, because we're all talking about like, well, the town and the vote and the budget and the this and the that. So that I think was a pretty elegant way of capturing it. So those are the changes from last time. Okay, are we ready to vote? Yes. Call the question.
I will call the question.
Okay, so we can vote, all those in favor of forwarding this resolution as a recommendation to the select board, say aye. Anyone opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? I'm thrilled.
Yay. And can I say you did a beautiful job of creating for us a template that we should follow with the town plan, with being so directive in the therefore, and this is what we expect the town to do. Like that, that's just such a beautiful model for how we can think about how we want the town plan actions and recommendations to be, right? So specific, time bound, very clear about who's doing what and allocating the resources to make it happen. So bravo, team.
So SJ and I and Eric, maybe you should come too. We'll go to the select board and present this and say, we think you should adopt this. Okay, next topic is the report on the Declaration of Inclusion.
I
can
share
that too.
I
Go one more,
put
is
it up
everybody okay to go another couple minutes?
So select board approved the declaration of inclusion during the April 6th meeting. It was, the purpose is twofold. To make public the commitment that Jericho is an inclusive and welcoming community. And to publicly condone discriminations and isms in all of its forms. Such as racism, sexism, ableism. And so the DEI committee crafted this statement based on a statewide movement of about right now there's 112 towns that have these kinds of declaration of inclusion statements. Started out in 2020. The governor chimed in 2021 and did a statewide declaration of inclusion. So these statements are more and more common, and the overall purpose is to be really explicit to folks who live, work, and want to live in Jericho about the kind of community we aspire to be. We used some resources. We looked at the community looked at other towns' statements, and there's a ton of resources out of Vermont, these cities and towns too, that help inform the writing of the statement. And I must say, we had a wonderful presentation to the select board, which included one of our members who is graduating, and then we too. It was great.
Well,
Yeah.
congratulations. Thank you very much. And yes, this absolutely now can be front and center as a organizing principle or theme
Right.
for the town plan.
And it's the first step, really.
Yeah.
Right, because like that last paragraph is a nudge to looking at how we as committees and our governance structures can operationalize the vision statement.
And I did notice it is right at the top of the homepage when you go to the website. So it's featured very prominently.
Okay. I think we need to adjourn and that we need to table all the other items on our agenda.
Sounds good.
So I make a motion to table everything else.
I'll second it.
You disagree?
Yeah.
Okay,
I have a very brief topic.
okay. Is it report events? All right, so can we table planners report?
Yes. we can.
Okay. Go ahead.
The farmers market is on Thursday, and we have a table,
Mhm,
and you and I are signed up to volunteer, but I cannot stay for the full time,
mhm.
so if anyone else.
I'm going to be there.
Yes,
Okay.
Dean is gonna be there. And we need to talk though about what we're gonna do, because we were gonna do values, but I don't know that we should still do that, given
Correct.
where
I
we
don't think
are
we're
on
there
the
yet.
plan.
So we can take
So-
that discussion offline,
Yeah,
but just know I cannot be there for the whole time,
okay,
from like 3 o'clock set up till 7:30 take down, I can't make it for that.
that's okay. What time is best for you?
Probably earlier.
Okay.
3 to 5.
Okay. All right, any other mission critical reports under reports? No, okay, other business, can we table other business? And wrap up with planning for next meeting. So our next meeting, June 20th, will be with David again.
Yep.
We have no meeting on July 4th, and then we'll meet on July 18th, and that meeting will be a review of the draft.
How
We're
soon
gonna have,
before
like,
the meeting will
cookies.
we see that?
So Friday before.
A weekend to review.
Yes, so know now that you need to allocate time that weekend. But he said it's
All
only gonna,
30
it's gonna be short.
Section 1,
So
right?
30.
It's section.
Yeah, it's gonna be less than 30 pages.
Well, you may get the whole thing. You will definitely get the section 1, volume 1. But also, appreciate that it is an iterative process,
Yes.
particularly right now, or it's front loaded as a highly iterative process where you'll get a draft we'll talk about it and, we'll have a little bit of time before then we'll produce another draft that we'll talk about in more detail. And then you'll have something that will kind of start the adoption process in September, which is again, still iterative in your hands. Iterative.
Right. So nobody needs to panic. We have plenty of time,
Okay.
especially you. Okay.
I thought, well, I was the one that I was the only one that needed it.
So we don't need an executive session. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Eric, motion to adjourn. Second.
Second.
Chris, all those in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.